Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I'm going to talk about, can I satisfy the lover in you? That is a concern that every man thinks about. Now, some guys come out of the gate, they're real confident about their sexuality. I mean, they have the look, they dress the part, they wear the cologne, and, they've got it all together. At least they certainly appear to. But I don't care who he is. There are times, unless he's just a supernatural human being, that men have on some level of performance anxiety. Guys will ask you questions about your past relationships just to try to glean something about your romanticism. I mean, it's not just knowing about your style, but eventually you get to the part when you talk about your lovemaking, the sex. And that's always interesting. Now, guys are very typical, want to come off as being very confident. And even more, it's not just wanting to be confident, but they don't want to come off as being insecure. But the guys have questions that they would like to have answers to. And a lot of times they don't know how to ask it without seeming insecure. They want to know if the guy somebody that you were with, if he was well endowed physically, or how long he was able to last in bed. And I can tell you that, when you're young, you're worried about that your inexperience will show. And, they're worried about premature ejaculation and whether they know enough about the female anatomy. Middle-aged men are worried about that their erections aren't firm or it doesn't happen fast enough. And then like they were when they're in their teens. But then, older men worry about whether their erections will even happen at all, that is less frequent. So all throughout a man's life, they have concerns about their performance anxiety. And so that's just operating in the background. And men do want to know the answers to these questions. And I there are lots of studies out there that talk about the average size of a male organ and the average length of a sexual encounter, whether it's a lot of their perceptions obviously are generated in stories, theater, and I call porn theater because it's there to entice you. And the acting and the stories, and, some of it's like reality programming, reality TV. It's filmed in a way that makes it seem a little more natural. And there's sex for people of all ages. There's young, there's older, and then there's older, and there's young sex, younger people having sex with older partners. So it's all over the board. And, that's just the different flavors of people that pair up. But when it comes to being sexual in and of itself and wanting to know something about whether you can satisfy, your partner, the lover in you, there's a lot of anxiety because it's about pleasure. It's about feeling good. When you go out and you see a movie, and you watch the movie and you critique it, it's easy because you leave the movie. I mean, who really cares what you said about it? If you don't like it, you don't like it, you don't go back. But when it's something about lovemaking, and the conversation is very personal, it's between the two of you, and you're asking and wanting to be able to be pleasing, and that's why. So the stakes are pretty high, and it's men are providers, and what they want to be able to do is also provide a sexually satisfying experience for their partner. That's the gravity of the situation. And I'm talking about the guys specifically because guys in and of themselves take it upon themselves to feel like they know everything that's going on. And unfortunately, because they really don't, you really have to educate yourself. And I've even talked about it in my podcast that doing a little bit of research can put a lot of these concerns aside. But how many guys really do the research? And then there are just specific things that they have to ask the partner. You can do research to find out the size of the male member. You can do research that says how long the average sexual encounter lasts. But like I said, most people don't do that. And it's not personal enough. That's why. So even if you do the research, it's like, okay, where do you fall in all of that? And So how would a guy ask a question like, hey, how big was the last guy that you dated? I mean, was he a football player? Was he athletic, or was he a heavy guy? Did he drink? Those kinds of questions. And would you be comfortable? Hey, and I'm speaking to a woman. Hey, would you be comfortable if a guy actually asked you those questions, or would you just sort of or not answer? And this is all of this stuff, and I'm talking about this is before you've ever had a sexual encounter. These are the kind of questions and curiosities that I think we have about each other. Now, if the guy never asks, then I think he's pretty confident with whatever he's got. And that's not to say he's not curious, but that's just to say that he's pretty confident with whatever he has. And I think some of that can be gleaned. He might feel confident because of maybe the kind of conversation you have. Meaning, if you talk about your sexual encounters a lot, then a guy is probably going to wonder a little bit about that, whether he can be pleasing, because obviously it's important to you. But if you talk about sex in a roundabout way, about the fact that it's really important for you to have a connection with your partner, and it's not about all the athleticism and things like that, well then, maybe your partner can kind of glean, or your potential partner can kind of glean the idea that, okay, well, she's, very pragmatic, and it's really about, whatever it is the two of us have. And that's what's really important. I mean, if a guy is super endowed, you're going to know it. And he'll probably know it, and they'll probably have to work out some negotiations, dealing with lubricants and, taking it easy and those sorts of things, because you don't want to go rushing into something like that and have an unpleasurable experience, because it's not going to be repeated. And guys like to be able to come back. It's like having a second date. You go on the first date to know if you're going to have a second date. And when you're sexual the first time, you want to know that you're going to be able to do it again, because you want to have a future with that. But going back to, talking about sex and knowing, can I satisfy the lover in you? You kind of break it down into different parts. There is the communication part. So being able to have good open communication with your partner obviously feels like a good start. And I'm going to tell you, work on that part, because and I'm just saying if the sex is not great, if, let's just say, there's some mismatch, there's some awkwardness, there's some things that just weren't great. If you have communication, then you could feel confident that you can work on that. And as I shared on one of my other podcasts, if you're communicating about the sexual performance thing, you might want to do it outside the bedroom, not in, because that just front loads the situation. It makes it real awkward. But establish a good relationship in terms of the communication, because you can come back to that and then talk about, okay, what worked and what didn't work. And it feels good. If you don't have the good communication from the beginning, I'm going to tell you that when it comes to the sex, when it comes to the physical part about it, you're going to have a problem working through it, because of the awkwardness about trying to talk about this and do it in a way that is, tender and not sound like it's going to be an attack. Because this is a very, very sensitive topic to talk about. Because remember, guys tend to have performance anxiety. And if there's some way in which they can work around that, and it's usually in the way we talk about it, and it's, calm, and if you're a woman, be reassuring for a guy, because he appreciates that. And I put it in those terms because we generally expect guys to be the aggressor. You expect a guy to want to be sexual with you and to bring it. And when he can't, there is either a lack of knowledge, maybe there's a medical condition that he hasn't discussed. And again, remember I talked about communication. See, you want to have that as part of the discussion too. Look, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to expand on this a little bit more. Stay tuned. And we're back. And ladies, I'm going to share something else. Oftentimes, guys are, we were talking about can I satisfy the lover in you? In, just to recap, I talked about having good communication, and you want to have that in place in the beginning so that you can talk about sexual whatevers and not feel awkward about it. And then when in fact you do have a sexual experience, if something doesn't work out all that great, then you can fall back on the communication to work out the rough spots. For the most part, until guys really, really take an interest in human sexuality, most guys are really ignorant about the female anatomy. Okay, totally. I mean, they know that the outside, they know what a girl is shaped like, they know where the breasts are, they know that that they're different than a woman in terms of men have penises and women don't. All of that is just pretty. I mean, you can look at dolls and understand that part. But when it comes to really understanding how the female anatomy works, about the clitoris, about the labia, about orgasms, about the G-spot, a lot of times these are just words to men until they've had an opportunity to be with someone and really delve into having a good sexual relationship. And oftentimes guys are so bad at communicating, they don't talk about these things. I mean, they don't generally talk about it amongst themselves in terms of men. What guys typically do is they talk about how hard they brought it, how vigorous they are, and, she was happy, she was satisfied. Guys don't necessarily have discussion groups about how to please a woman because that's just not what men do. And seeing as a lot of their information is sort of circumstantial, meaning they get in a relationship with a girl and then they just sort of do things and sort of ask questions afterward and not even in the moment. And that's what young people do because, they're kind of excited to be there in the moment. I mean, who's going to be asking questions then? Most aren't. And that's just what teenagers, what people, first timers do, or really young kids do. I mean, I remember when I was sexual as a teenager, I was lucky that I was even having sex. So I didn't really ask a lot of questions. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a book that actually had pictures and said that this part goes into there that I really learned something about what sex was. I mean, I knew what it was to have an orgasm, but even then, I think I might have been a little bit embarrassed to begin with because, you have that sex face when you're having an orgasm and and to be looked at while you're having sex. See, that was something that I wasn't necessarily really comfortable with until I got much older. And then really learned to have the pleasure of understanding what intimacy is. So you see, when you're young and you're going through all of that stuff, see, nobody's telling you that. It's just something that is trial and error. So if you're younger and you're listening to the podcast, understand that a lot of this stuff is awkward because nobody's going to tell you. If you're a little older and you've had some sexual experience and a lot of it seems to replicate what you had when you first began to have sex, then I understand that women talk about these kinds of things probably a lot more than guys do in terms of what it should feel like and what to expect, what to experience. And that having been the case, this is why guys are so much further behind women when it comes to these kind of things. So given that one of the first things I talked about was the communication part to this, this is how we're going to get over the hump. And I know guys like to want to take the lead, but I'm going to tell you, they're awkward about it. So they're going to ask the questions about, well, how big was the guy and how long and did that satisfy you? Well, that's because that's where their mind is. But when you want to have communications about good sex, you want to be talking about what feels good, how, different positions. You might even take some sort of class on human sexuality together, or get a book and read it together and try different positions. I'm sure most, books that have illustrations in it, or, they encourage you to try something like that. That's where you sort of get into the nuts and bolts of this. But you see, that is something in which you are learning to do together. And the conversation gets much more, it gets elevated because we're not just talking about the basic stuff. Like I say, if you're taking a class on a mutual pleasure, or there's lots of information. Like I said, this is where you do your research. There's DVDs on sexuality for younger people, for even older adults, if you're an older person who's listening to my podcast, and on about using marital aids was the funny word that they used to use, but that's like vibrators, and let's talk about safe sex too. Let's talk about condoms. Let's talk about, barrier protection, and, what types of lubricants to use with what types of condoms, that sort of thing. See, there's a lot of things we can talk about in satisfying the lover that doesn't just relate to being the physical part of the man taking the penis and putting it inside of the woman. That's so it's much more in depth, and luckily and fortunately it is, because it's not about how long you have sex. It's really about, did it feel good while you were there? And when you're able to be in that kind of conversation, then time just seems to not be an issue, because the time fills itself. And as you are spending that intimate time together, I mean, you're making good memories for one, and you're also creating the environment. Well, you like this, you want to do this more, and you make time for it, and you enjoy the time you have together. That's what's really good about being sexual. Something else that's important to note is sex isn't just about the thrusting and in that. And I'm saying this to guys so that when the conversation comes up, there isn't this huge rush to just get off. And guys definitely enjoy an orgasm, and I know women do too. And oftentimes, and I'm not saying exclusively, but oftentimes, especially when men are young, they have an orgasm a lot easier. And if it comes to the point where he's having an orgasm and you aren't, remember I talked about the communication thing. You got to learn how to slow him down. And there's physical techniques in which you can learn to help a man delay an ejaculation. And you can literally grab his member, and when he starts to get close, you can kind of squeeze it a little bit, right? Take your thumb right along the bottom, just about where the scrotum meets the penis, and it will help delay his ejaculation. It'll get him to slow down. And for yourself, this is a technique that you can work with and you can practice. This would be something that the two of you can work on together, and it'll help him last a little longer. And it might work out to be a little bit of a tease, but that's something that you can do to help him. And when he gets to understanding what your rhythm is like and how long it works for you, then it's great. And I know a lot of these things men don't figure out until they're like their third or fourth partner down the road. It's just sometimes because women don't speak up, guys wind up bouncing because they think that maybe they haven't met the criteria. Or maybe they feel like they know somebody who's a little freakier, who can, give them a little more for the experience. So if you're an inexperienced woman when it comes to sex, I mean, you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, just to say it, because you don't necessarily know what to expect. And if you don't have a good experience, then you're going to kind of wonder, okay, well, that wasn't all that good. So, what should I be shooting for? And this is the interesting thing. When guys think about this, they want somebody who's experienced. And when women think about this, it's, they want somebody who's experienced. Guess what? You two aren't really going to probably meet each other. This is where I think, for the guys, this is where women tend to pick guys who are a little bit older, who are a little more experienced, and who make the sexual experience a little more fun. They may start out with a guy who's their age, but generally graduate to men who are a little older. Or in the case of some, it would be that they're attracted to an older guy because he's a little more mature. Now, when I say older, I'm talking, relatively, age range of, say, 5 to 10 years, because it's around in that space where guys have matured a little bit and women have a little more confidence in the guy is not just going to use them, but he's really interested. Because young men come off with the appearance of that they're just going to use a woman just to get off and then bounce and go to the next partner. Well, guys, look, women don't appreciate being used that way. So you're going to get a lot of resistance. And that's probably why you do get a lot of resistance. Look, I'm saying I need to take a break here, and I'll be right back after the message.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So, to say to the men who would be listening to this, one of the important things is to have a positive mindset when you're talking sex with your partner, and make it that you're interested. Make it also that you're interested in learning, not just interested in sex, because we're all interested in sex, but make it that you're interested in learning something about your partner, and give her the confidence to know that whatever we're talking about is okay. Because when you're inexperienced, you don't know the questions to ask. I mean, you might be a good at having a rapport, speaking, but for a lot of people, they haven't had good sexual experiences. And because of that, they're not going to seem really knowledgeable. Even if you've read books, it's one thing to read it, but it's another thing to do it. And if you're a woman talking to a guy, remember, one thing that a guy doesn't really want to hear is all about the guys you've had before. Because remember, guys do have performance anxiety, and it shows up in a number of ways. It's not just about premature ejaculation, but it could be in the confidence of, if I don't do well with this, then I know you're just going to bounce and get someone else. And, that's not to say that you wouldn't, but it's to just sort of a boundary. It's like a mutual appreciation kind of thing. We're trying to leave out the idea that that this is a test, and if you don't pass the test, we're not going to do it again. I mean, if he's no good because he's boorish and impolite, that kind of thing, yeah, of course, don't go back. And the same thing for the guy. Hey, guys, if you're dealing with a woman who's insensitive and can't seem to listen to how you feel about it, and when you're trying to communicate, remember, we're doing this with love and respect, then you don't want to be with that person anyway. Let them go on to somebody else. Because as it is, there's plenty of partners out there, and I think you want to find the one that's right for you. But you have to take interest in that. You have to be the one. You got to be proactive. So with all that in mind, we are expressing ourselves sexually, and you need to do it with some class and some dignity. Of course, when you get in the bedroom, it's behind closed doors, have fun, enjoy yourselves. But remember that as you're trying to satisfy the lover in you, that is, it's mutual. It should be mutual appreciation. And as I've shared, men oftentimes have performance anxiety, and it kind of lasts with them all through life. And I think for women, they want to know that they're good enough. And I think as men, you owe it to your partner to tell her that she satisfies you. I mean, you need to know enough about yourself so that you can ask your partner for things. And I know it's, and when I say ask, there's a way to ask. You don't, that you're not condescending about it. Because one of the things that women hate, they hate being talked down to. I mean, if you're a man and you're being sexual with, and you're being lovers and you're having, you can have your love games and role play and stuff like that. But there's a way you can do it that's not demeaning. And sometimes people slip and they get into that zone where where they are being demeaning. And that's not sexy. That's not attractive. That'll make a person come right out of something and say, wait a minute, what did you say? See, that'll get you a no vote every time. So I'm not saying that I want you to be thinking about this because you're really in your love motion, you're experiencing yourself, you're having a good time, but you're also being present to the fact that who you're with. And I'm going to say this, you don't ever want to forget who you're with, because you slip up and say somebody else's name, you have just sunk your future. That's going to require a lot of explaining if you ever get back into bed with that person again. So there's a reason for keeping your wits about you and being mindful about what the heck's going on. Okay. So I want to wrap it up by sharing, listen, women, understand that men are pleasers. They really do want to be your hero in bed. They want to feel like they satisfy you, that they take care of your needs, and they are willing to listen. They are definitely willing to listen. So please take some time to think about what your needs are and communicate those to your lover. And I'm going to say this to the men. In fact, here, I hope both of you are listening to this podcast because I'm talking to both partners here. And I'm going to say to the men, listen to your partner. She will share with you her feelings. And it's kind of hard to know what you want every time, all the time, because that's just the nature of being humans. We don't know everything. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. But given an opportunity to just let your mind be free and to be open to experiencing things with each other, I think you can have a wonderful, healthy sexual relationship. And for that, you will be satisfied. You will rest well. And sex is good for your health. Okay. It is definitely good for your health. With raining outside, you don't feel like taking a jog around the block. Look, take a shower, get naked, make love to your partner. And that could be your cardio for the day. So with that having been said, I'm John Johnson. This is your Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, talking about, can I satisfy the lover in you? Yes, you can. Thanks for joining me.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.